Hello and welcome to another episode of Tesseract Talks, the place where we put the spotlight on tech trends, startups, and VCs. I'm your host, Marko, the founder and CEO of Tesseract Analytics, and it is my pleasure today to have Scott Taylor as our guest. The famous data whisperer, which is great timing because next week we have Big Data London here, and he'll actually be flying over to be one of the speakers. Scott, welcome. How are you?
Marko, thanks for having me on Tesseract Talks. Great to be here.
Amazing. I saw the title of one of your talks at the event, and I think it's best to start with that. Can you briefly unpack what does data is the new bullshit means for you?
Yeah, data is the new bullshit, or the subtitle, which is as important. Why the way we talk about data is holding the industry back and what you can do about it. And it's my view that the way we talk about data, the terms we use, the vocabulary that we use, the whole approach that we have is actually holding our progress back when it comes to trying to get executive support and stakeholder engagement and funding for the data work that we all want to do. So I'm trying to help data leaders craft some form of business accessible narrative that cuts through a lot of the tech talk that we're so used to using and gets right to the business value of what they're trying to do.
Great. And you've spoken about how buzzwords like Lakehouse, Fabric, or AI clutter communication. How do they hinder meaningful data conversations?
Because sometimes they just need to be explained, and the person you're explaining to doesn't really care. So I'm sure Lakehouse has some very valuable technical aspects, but I believe that most CEOs think that's where their data goes on vacation. Just the wording we use, the techno babble, the claims and how thrilled we always are about implementing the latest analytics, graph hub, fabric mesh, and all these sort of half metaphors that don't really get to the point that we want to make to get that engagement, to get that support, to get people to realize the truly enterprise-wide value of what data teams do in an organization. So those technical terms we should keep between ourselves and use the language of the business to explain why it's important.
Makes sense. I mean, your data philosophy, truth before meaning, is elegant and powerful. How do you guide teams to embrace this, especially when pressure builds to show quick insights?
Well, I appreciate the elegance remark there for sure. And I spent a lot of time actually boiling it down. And part of a technique when you're doing storytelling is how succinct can you be? How direct can you be, especially when we're trying to talk to the business side? And so for me, I had to get my data philosophy down to 3 words. I couldn't get it any fewer than that. As you mentioned, truth before meaning. People want to determine the truth in data. They want to derive meaning out of data. For me, those are the 2 big areas of focus that data teams should be looking at, but you have to do it in that order. You have to determine the truth in data first before you derive meaning out of it. Otherwise, it's not chicken or egg here. It's egg or omelet. If you don't have truth in data, if you can't trust that data, if that data isn't something that people can depend on, then the meaning you're going to get out of it is not going to be the meaning that you expected. And it's important to have people realize data management, which is what I consider a lot of the activities around determining the truth. Data management, data governance, data stewardship, master data, reference data, metadata, MDM, RDM, PIM, RAM, DAM, all those foundational activities that and I know every enterprise needs to do to steward and curate and deliver that core content across their organization. Those have to be in place first, not totally done, but at least thought of and put in place before you start to get meaning out of the data through analytics, AI, BI, ML, all the cool, hot, super fancy stuff that gets a disproportionate amount of the attention and funding and support, given how dependent it is on the determining the truth part. So again, very simple way to try and explain it. Determine the truth in your data before you derive meaning, truth before meaning.
You've briefly touched upon already storytelling. So how does strong storytelling help bridge the gap between data management and executive attention?
Executives have very little time to deal with anything. And especially when you come in there with a highly complicated idea, which technology is, there's no question about it. And I'm not suggesting that we don't have technical terms for a real reason. It's just when conveying that value, it gets in the way. And so putting things in the form of a story It's just a natural way that humans communicate. It's the way to convince people of the benefits of what you have to offer and putting it in some form of storyline, creating a picture of why we need this, looking at the challenges that are in our in front of us to be able to achieve our business goals, the kinds of things we need to do to get value out of data across the organization. Putting this in a narrative, putting this in a story format is going to help you break through and convince and certainly be more palatable to the audience you're trying to engage with. And we all know how to tell stories. That's the thing too. I mean, it's funny because in the
That's also questionable. I think that's an art. I think strong storytelling is an art in its own.
strong story, I agree. It's definitely an art. But if you think about, I mean, everybody listening to this, every person in every organization, pretty much, over the weekend they did something fun and they want to explain it to their family in some way. They're going to do it in a story. They're not just going to list the details of, I walked this many steps and I, saw whatever the technical part of that was. They're going to convey it in a story. The challenge we have in the data space is to be great at data. You need to be really good at the hard skills. And storytelling, I guess it's ironic that storytelling is a soft skill and it's actually very difficult and hard to to be able to do. But and that kind of holds some data leaders back, because to be great, they had to be good at hard skills, but to be really expanding as a leader and to be in the presence of other leaders in your organization, you've got to be good at the soft skills. And as a data person, you're up against much better storytellers in your organization. The marketing people know how to tell stories all day long. Salespeople can tell stories. Otherwise, they don't make quota. It's part of the fabric of other departments to be able to tell stories. And bringing this idea into the data side has only helped us, again, communicate in a much more accessible fashion.
And I guess my next question is a bit tied to this one. In your experience, what are the biggest mistakes leaders make when pitching data initiatives to executives? And also, how can they do better, particularly when budgets are on the line?
The number one rule I have around data storytelling for data management, which is what I call it, is focus on the why, not the how. And data folks love to explain how they did something, and not only how they did it, but all the different things they did to come up with this eventual way that we tried. And we did this and then we did that. So you got to tell a story, but not your life story. And you've got to focus on why it's important. Everything we do in data needs to enable the strategic intentions of your enterprise. Where's your company going and why is data going to help you get there? Those answers are there. But I never met a CEO or a CFO or anybody else on the executive side in terms of stakeholders for data programs care about how it's done until they understand why it's important. So start with that business reason. Start with why your company's trying to do what they need to do and why you can help them.
Great recommendation. And your work, especially Data Puppets, blends humor with data. And by the way, that's how I first came across you. I saw the Data Puppets many years ago. That's how I got to know you, and then obviously started following you. So the Data Puppets, an example, it blends humor with data. Why do you believe levity matters in this place?
It just is a disarmor. It just breaks through. If you say something that's sort of humorous, you can suddenly break down all kinds of walls and people just get much more accepting to the rest of your message. The Data Puppets, as you mentioned, and those of you listening who don't know it, it stars the CDO, the Chief Dog Officer, and they hire a catsultant from Meow Kinsey, and they've got an ITB who speaks only in buzzwords. It goes on from there. And I've had a ball. This is kind of my business hobby. I don't make much revenue on content for that, but I love doing it. And it's very unique in the space. If you Google the term Data Puppet, the only thing that comes up is me. That was kind of inspirational for me to do more, because Google has never seen the words data and puppets together other than associated with my work. So I've got 100% organic reach. This is an SEO marketer's dream, if you will, that this term Data Puppets I seem to have owned. But it really breaks through. And what was amazing for me, the first one I did, it's all these buzzwords and all this dialogue that goes back and forth between the Chief Dog Officer and the ITB and this monkey from the monkey business, and they're all just babbling. And the biggest piece of feedback I got, the most consistent piece of feedback was, this sounds just like my organization. This was a meeting I just went through. And I'm like, Yeah, it's like
90% of organizations.
yeah, and they're doing all these jokes that I put together in the data space. So it really struck a nerve with folks in a great way. And I've expanded it from there. I've got 4 or 5 more episodes. I'm going to have some world premiere content at Big Data London for my Data Puppets keynote, where I'm showing some videos that haven't been shown before. And I have this kind of Simpsons-like casting approach where I've cast a lot of other data influencers and data stars as voices in this series, and sometimes they play a little bit of a parody of themselves, and it's just a fabulous time. I have so much fun. It's an insane amount of work, but I love it. Again, it's my business hobby, so you got to love your hobby.
Yeah, can't wait to see that. Maybe before we wrap up, if you had a magic wand, what one change would you make in the data industry's communication culture?
I think it would just be to have people realize, if you want to speak to the business, speak in the language of your business. Start there. Understand the vision of your business, where it's going. Understand the voice of your business, how it sounds to the external world. Understand the vocabulary you use is critical to communicating, and avoid all these kind of hackneyed, cliched things that simply don't work. Data's the new oil, hence my, making fun of that with my data's the new bullshit title. Data quality, it's important, but that terminology doesn't really sell. It doesn't really grab people's attention. If it did, I wouldn't be on your show right now, Marco. If everybody believed in data quality already, my job would have been done decades ago. But my magic wand would just be to speak the language of your business.
Okay, great point to finish it out. Thank you so much, Scott, for coming to the show. This was all. And yeah, really looking forward to meeting you next week at Big Data London. And to our audience, whoever is in the town, come and meet us.
Come and see me there. Marco, this has been great. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you so much. Bye.